At 5:30 a.m., a faint light slips through the small, grimy window of Ingrid's one-room home in 14th century London. The city begins to stir. A rooster crows, distant church bells signal lauds, and wooden carts creak over cobblestones. Ingrid, a cobbler's widow in her mid-30s, rises from her straw-filled mattress, brushing bits of hay from her woolen kirtle. February's chill has seeped into the room, and she wraps a coarse linen shawl around her shoulders before starting the day. By 5:45 a.m., she rekindles the small hearth. The scent of last night's ashes mingles with the damp air as she strikes flint to spark the kindling and carefully coaxes the fire to life. Its warmth is a small luxury, treasured as she prepares a modest breakfast: coarse rye bread with a thin smear of lard and a mug of weak ale. The bread is dense, slightly sour, and tough to chew, but filling enough to keep her going. At 6:15 a.m., Ingrid, a lean and wiry woman in her mid-30s with dark brown hair tied in a simple braid and a weathered, pale face, wears a worn woolen kirtle and coarse linen shawl, steps outside to draw water from the communal well. The streets are narrow and muddy, flanked by timber-frame buildings that lean toward each other like old companions. The air carries a mix of smells: wood smoke, animal dung, and the distant tang of the Thames. She greets a neighbor with a nod. Words are scarce this early. Hauling the heavy bucket home, she feels strain in her arms, but has no choice. Water is essential for cleaning, cooking, and the small leatherwork she still does to make ends meet. By 7 a.m., she is at her work corner where her late husband's tools are neatly arranged. Though not a master, she has learned to repair torn leather shoes and broken straps. Today she patches a hole in a fisherman's boots. The leather is stiff and smells faintly of salt and fish, but her hands are steady as she stitches, the needle moving methodically through tough material. Outside, the city grows louder. Vendors call out wares, hooves clatter on stone, a child cries. At 9 a.m., Ingrid stretches her back and eats a small piece of cheese with bread. Whispers suggest trouble in the city. John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, has angered townsfolk by trying to strip London of privileges. Rumors travel quickly in crowded streets. She wonders if unrest will reach her neighborhood, then pushes the thought aside and returns to work. By 11 a.m., she heads to market for a few essentials. The streets are crowded with merchants, laborers, and housewives, and she holds her basket close, weaving through the press with practiced ease. The market smells of spices, fresh bread, and raw meat, though the stench of unwashed bodies and refuse lingers. She buys a small sack of dried peas, a handful of onions, and a piece of salted fish. Money is tight. She haggles to stretch her few pennies as far as possible. At 12:30 p.m., Ingrid joins other widows and working women at church for midday prayers. Within the cold stone walls and faintly musty air, she kneels on the hard floor and murmurs Latin prayers. The familiar rhythm brings a sense of peace, though her mind drifts to her late husband and the strain of raising two boys alone. The sons now live with apprenticeships outside the city, leaving Ingrid to fend for herself with work and prayer. By 2 p.m., she returns home and prepares a simple stew for the evening. Chopped onions from the market go into a pot with water, dried peas, and a scrap of salted pork she had been saving. The fire crackles and the pot simmers, filling the small room with savory steam. Ingrid stirs occasionally, thoughts wandering to the stories of riots. She wonders if she will hear news from neighbors later. At 3:30 p.m., she finishes the day's repairs and carries the fisherman's boots to his home near the river. The Thames is a hive of activity. Boats ferry goods and passengers along murky water. The fisherman's wife greets her warmly and pays a few coins. It is not much, but enough for a bit more food this week. Ingrid pockets the money and weaves back through crowded streets, alert to jostling elbows and sudden carts. By 5 p.m., the sun begins to set, stretching long shadows across the city. The air grows colder, and she wraps her shawl tightly around her shoulders. She stops by a neighbor's house to share news and gossip. Talk quickly turns to the day's riot. A mob stormed Henry Percy's residence and marched on the Savoy Palace, forcing John of Gaunt to flee. Voices carry a mix of fear and grim satisfaction. Ingrid listens intently, heart heavy with worry about what such unrest might bring for livelihoods like hers. At 6:30 p.m., Ingrid returns home and eats her stew. The warmth of the meal comforts after a long day's labor. She savors the simple flavors, thinking of her boys and hoping they eat well in their apprenticeships. The small room seems quieter than ever, the crackling fire the only sound. Despite the solitude, she takes pride in surviving on her own. By 8 p.m., she lights a small tallow candle and settles down with mending. In the dim light, her eyes strain as she patches a tear in her other kirtle. Outside, the city softens but never fully sleeps. An occasional shout or clatter drifts through the night air. She pauses to reflect. Boots repaired, stew cooked, news shared. Despite the challenges, a flicker of hope persists. Tomorrow will bring more work and more struggle, but also the chance to keep going. At 9 p.m., Ingrid prepares for bed. She banks the fire to hold warmth through the night and settles onto her mattress. Pulling the rough wool blanket over herself, she whispers a final prayer for protection and strength. Her thoughts drift to the future, to her son's prospects, and to the hope that peace will return to the city.